Welcome to the chapter on the challenges of policy for the informal economy. The informal economy consisting of informal enterprises and dependent contractors. And the dependent contractors we will speak about are home workers and platform workers. Informal enterprises, as we know, are small enterprises with a small scales of operation. Often they are own account enterprises where they are working with purely family labor. But other than that, there are larger informal enterprises who have subcontracting chains with the large enterprises. If we take the case of the automobile industry, we know that they work in a subcontracting tier system, so that you have a tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 of subcontracting chain, where the large company like the Honda car would subcontract a large part of its parts to a tier 1 level, and then it goes on and they will subcontract part of the work to a lower tier and a lower tier. And the lowest tier in this could be in the informal sector. Now, when this happens, there is the positive and the negative of it. The positive is that because they would be producing parts for a company like the Honda, the specifications are very, very clear. And in order to create those products with those specifications, there's a particular kind of technology involved. So when a firm subcontracts to a smaller firm, they will also lead to a flow of technology and the skills required to undertake that technology or to be able to use that technology. So this leads to a flow of and a diffusion of the technology to a large proportion of the small enterprises. So this is the positive part of helps to improve the technology in the smaller enterprises. In this, the state along with the private sector can help technology innovations. And other than those which are linked to large enterprises like the Honda in the automobile company, there are a lot of other small enterprises in other growth-oriented industries which are not necessarily linked to the very large sector. In this case also, they would require technological support which can be provided by the state or private sector to improve their technology, so that their value addition per worker, the value addition per enterprise can improve, their profit levels would improve as well. Along with technology comes a skill, because any new technology requires a new skill as well. So skill training becomes a very important component of trying to improve the level of informal enterprises in terms of their value addition. So the traditional model are vocational training institutions, which are very often run by the government, particularly in the developing countries. And when they're run by the governments, very often they are their infrastructures become very antiquated, and they are treating technologies which are not being used anymore in the industry. So in order to upgrade these kind of vocational training institutes, a public-private partnership model would be extremely useful, particularly if you were to get these progressive industries to help to upgrade the technology and then take on their workers in their industries. On the supply side, the workers, the trainees who would like to go to these training institutes might be facing a financial crunch, particularly in developing countries. An education loan or a trainee loan without collateral, because providing collateral is the main problem for the poorer, not so well off trainees. Such a loan could be repaid in small installments and after the trainee secures a job. And this loan should be able to include not just the cost of the vocational training, but also the cost of the commute to the center, which could be quite a cost in if there are distances involved. So educational loan is something which would help train workers to be ready for the industries, particularly the upcoming industries. The traditional form of skill training has been the apprentice program, where on-the-job training is done by enterprises for workers who are not necessarily even paid a stipend. These models are very well developed in the developed countries, like Germany does very well on vocational training. But in developing countries, this model is used by small enterprises to gain apprentices, and then they take them on later on. But in the process of on the job training, the apprentices are really not paid. So this process of the traditional system could be more formalized, and with a amount of cost sharing by the worker and the enterprise, and it could also be financed by an external agency, preferably through a loan. So this would enhance the capacity of workers to be able to, requiring training, to be able to undertake this kind of a training. It will also ease the costs that the enterprise has to incur while allowing this training to occur in their enterprises. This training, after they are trained or in a process of training, including in the vocational training institutions, it's very important that the worker gets a skill certificate at the end, because then each skill certificate that he acquires would help him to move up in his career. It would help him to progress in the ladder of his career. And it could also be an add-on. So you acquire one skill and some kind of a certificate, and then you acquire a skill better than that, and then you get a certificate for that, and that improves your chances of getting a job and progressing in your career. Institutional support may be required to actually create this kind of a skill certification system, because it also requires that the skill level that the trainee has acquired in that institution or on the job in an industry has to be tested, and it depends on what skill he has actually acquired. He would obtain a skill certification process. So this could also be supported by the government and the private enterprise, which might be crying for the fact that they don't get enough trained workers. There are other policies which could help to encourage informal enterprises. Very often you will find that these enterprises of a particular industry, they cluster together in a particular area. Clustering of enterprises helps in networking across enterprises, and there are, as we spoke about, the subcontracting relationships between the large and the small enterprises. If such enterprises cluster together, and they can form networks, and then it is easier for the smaller enterprises to gain access to new markets, to new technology, which would help to improve their productivity and to improve their value addition per enterprise and per worker. So networking through clusters is another fashion in which informal enterprises can be helped. The other advantage of these kind of clustering of enterprises, like if there is an large automobile company, like we spoke about the Honda, you would find that smaller and subcontracting units will cluster around that area where the large company has set up its factory. This happens all over the world, and definitely in this developing countries where most of these are situated now. That area then becomes some kind of a skill concentration network, you can call it, because workers and enterprises are attracted to this area where the large enterprises are, because you have the chances of getting these subcontractors. You can have horizontal subcontracting, that is, I am a small enterprise and I take a particular contract from a large enterprise, but I don't have the facility to be able to handle it. So then I will subcontract part of my subcontract to another unit which is similar to mine. So that's called horizontal subcontracting. So if you have this kind of skill concentration networks within a cluster, then there could be horizontal subcontracting, and in this process, you actually help to upgrade the technology. So if I am going to subcontract part of my contract to the next firm, I would also have to make sure that they have the technology. So there would be the inflow of this technology and, of course, the skills to go with it. So this is another way in which these enterprises can be helped. Formation of these clusters, helping to improve the situation of these clusters and so on, could also be part of, and is a part of, government policy. UNIDO has been supporting many such clusters in various developing countries. Now we talk about the case of home workers. Now the issue with home workers is that they are undertaking subcontracting work, but then they are doing it in their homes. So when they do that, they are actually facing a lot of hidden costs. Uh, uh, if you look at small enterprises, sometimes the price actually received by the home worker for the product is like only 15 to 17% of the price which is paid by the customer, the final customer. In even smaller activities like incense stick rolling and so on, the amount or the price which is passed on to the actual worker would be as small as 2%. Mehrotra and Bigri in their book in 2007 have given a very large description of these activities. So some of the hidden costs of homework are rejection of the product on the grounds of poor quality. So they look at the products and they say, okay, this is not good, this is not good, and so on, and they cut it from the price or the wage. Another way in which the hidden cost occurs is that the payments are delayed or just deferred for completed products, which really means that the interest from that is being gained by the employer and not and these people and the workers are not really getting the benefit of their payments. The third is the fact that they are working at home. Because they are working at home, they are using their own infrastructure and electricity. So the home and workplace distinction is lost. The home actually becomes your workplace, in which case you are using infrastructure of your home, you're using it for storage, you're using it for keeping your equipment, and you're also using the electricity from your home. So that is another hidden cost which needs to be covered in a piece rate. Finally, supply of poor quality of raw material. So most of these home workers, they are dependent contractors because of the fact that they actually get the raw material from the contractor. Now, if they get poor quality supply of raw materials, then the product they produce is also going to be of poor quality. But then they are penalized for the poor quality of the product without taking into consideration the fact that they actually got poor raw materials. If one has to visualize, so we actually have an ILO convention on home workers, and it takes into consideration many of these recommendations which are being which we will speak about here. So one would require a piece rate for wages to home workers, which is equal to a time rate. Suppose I were to do the same work in a factory, what would I be paid? I should be paid the same wage. Not only that, it should not penalize me for the fact that the contractor has deferred the payment. So if the contractor defers the payment, the contractor should attract penal interest, particularly after a particular period. Okay, let's say that for 1 month, deferred payment is okay. But if the payment is deferred for more than one month, then some kind of a penal interest should be charged to the contractor. And then there are these deductions of wages for various reasons that I described above earlier. Some of the things that we described was cut in wages because of rejection of products, and it might happen because the raw material was poor. These kind of reduction in wages should also attract a fine. Obviously, this means that there has to be some kind of a monitoring of this kind of activity, which is a difficult proposition. But if we want to improve the conditions of the home workers, some method of looking after this has to be taken care of. So the infrastructure, the home workers, as I said, are using their own home as their place of work. So that is an infrastructure. They're using their own electricity. They're using their own tools and their own equipment. They might be having some kind of a system of cooling the place where they are, a fan or something of that kind. That's all paid for by them. If they were in a factory, it would be paid for by the factory. So these are direct costs of infrastructure which the home worker is incurring. If the wages were to recognize that there are these direct costs, and that should be added to the wages paid to these workers. There should be a record of the work done by the worker and the payments made, so that as in the case of a factory, you actually get a wage slip. So in the case of the home workers also, if they are registered and they are able to get a wage slip, then the chances of these kind of malpractices with regard to wages would be taken care of. And finally, to talk in terms of social security as a whole, for all workers in the informal enterprises, whether they are home workers or normal own account workers, a minimum social security package should be available to these workers. But the minimum social security cover should cover health benefits for the family, maternity benefits for the woman, and also maternity benefits for the spouse of the male workers, life and disability cover, and old age security for workers above the age of 60. But it would require support from the government as well as the understanding by the private sector that these workers are also contributing to the economy and to their enterprises. In order to finance this, they would require some kind of a national board for the promotion of livelihoods for workers in the informal sector. There are various national boards all across the world. There are national boards for construction workers, separately for BD workers and so on, which are the small cigarettes. And the contribution to these boards are made by the industry. So in the construction worker board, all infrastructure companies would have to contribute 1% or some percentage of their turnover, and that would create the funds required for this national security. So it is possible to create a national board for all workers in the informal enterprises, or it is possible to create national boards for specific industries like the construction industry, agricultural workers, then garment workers, and so on. And so you basically charge the private industry for in terms of a cess or in terms of some percentage of their turnover, so that you create the funds, because it's one thing to say that you need a social security cover, but you also need to think about where would the finances for the social security cover come from. And finally, to speak about the platform workers. Now, the platform workers are, it appears like a very ideal situation. You sit at home, you register yourself on a platform, and the enterprise also registers the work or the task on the platform, and you get this work. And that's fantastic. But very often these platform workers, if you look at the gig workers like the Uber or Lyft, the taxi workers, they are always facing this problem that the enterprise or the company would like to treat them as self-employed. And they would like to be categorized as employees. The reason is that if they are an employee, then this company would be forced to give them all the benefits that formal sector employees get. If they are treated as self-employed, then the company like Uber benefits from not having to pay all these social security benefits to these workers. So this misclassification of workers who are platform workers as employees, as self-employed rather than employee, is something that is happening in practice. And we know that in London and in other countries, some of these workers have gone to court with regard to this practice. They also don't have unions or anybody to legally represent them in a collective bargaining framework. So legal representation is something that has to be visualized for platform workers in various industries. The wages given to them, the wage per hour which is given to them has no standard. So some kind of a standard for these wages, and at least the prevailing minimum wage in that particular location, region, country should be provided to platform workers as well. Payment and fee transparency, in the sense that they should be paid the full amount that is billed to them in their real currency, rather than they billed something and they are paid something less than that. So the payment and fee transparency should exist for these platform workers. There's a lot of abuse that happens with platform workers. For example, when workers try to take up tasks from different platforms, they are penalized. So some amount of flexibility has to be provided to the platform workers, and they should not be penalized for declining to work for particular tasks and at particular hours of the day, or taking up work with another platform at any point in time. The terms and conditions, the work evaluation, the conditions of work, the dispute resolution should be clear for workers who work on the platform. This is particularly important because the proportion of workers which are becoming platform workers, as of now in the developed economies, and over time it's going to happen in developing economies as well, some kind of clear norms and conditions of work have to be defined for platform workers. To summarize the discussion that we have had with regard to policies for informal workers, we have been speaking about the problems faced by informal enterprises, home workers, and platform workers, and we have discussed in very great detail what kind of policy options can be worked out in order to take care of these issues, and also what kind of state and private sector collaboration is required in order to be able to come up with a feasible and possible policy for informal enterprises and dependent contractors. Thank you for joining us in this session on policies for informal economy and for informal enterprises in particular.